Don't worry, be happy.
Greetings from Napa Valley. Thank you for joining Napa Valley Sessions, an exploration of viticulture. I am Connor Best, the head of international marketing for Napa Valley Vintners, the trade association representing more than 500 wineries in our region. I'm incredibly excited today because we have nearly 300 RSVPs from 33 countries around the world joining us. Our audience, you, are an example of just how international the wine industry truly is. Today is the first part in a two-part series for the inquisitive wine professional. Our goal is to take a deep dive into the world of viticulture in Napa Valley with three of our region's leading viticulturists and one winemaker to help us tie it all together. In normal, non-pandemic years, we have the pleasure of hosting dozens of serious wine students in the Valley for firsthand experiences of the region. And we get to meet many more of you through the myriad seminars, conferences, trade events that we do throughout the year. This seminar, as well as Thursday's seminar on winemaking, are designed to help advanced wine students in their studies. But that's not to discourage anyone else from tuning in. I promise there will be something for everyone to learn, a little peek behind the curtain. If you like tonight's discussion, make sure you tune in Thursday. We will also have two incredibly interesting discussions in February in conjunction with our inaugural Napa Valley Library Wine Auction, featuring some of Napa Valley's most iconic brands. Stay tuned for more information. Finally, if you want to find an archive of our previous sessions, make sure you visit our Napa Sessions website at napavintners.com. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Master of Wine, Christine Amy. Amy Christine has over 15 years of experience across the wine industry, including sales, distribution, education, and winemaking. A graduate of Vanderbilt, she was awarded her Master of Wine certification in 2013. Amy and her husband, Peter, own and operate Holus Bolus Winery down a little south of us in Santa Barbara. Additionally, Amy works for Kermit Lynch Wine Merchants in Los Angeles, teaches WSET classes, and is a partner at the wine app Wine Ring. So Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I know that many of you are already deeply familiar with the appellation and have a love of Napa Valley wines, but I am going to take just a couple of minutes to provide a brief overview of the Napa Valley. Napa Valley is not large. It is 30 miles long and just a few miles wide. Napa Valley is wedged between two mountain ranges, the Mayacamas Mountains in the west and the Vaca Mountains in the east. They are pivotal, not only in providing various aspects, elevations, and grades of slope for grape growing, they are essential in influencing Napa Valley's climate. The Vacas serve to shield from the extreme heat pressure of the Central Valley to the east, and the Mayacamas aid in blocking cooler marine influences from the Pacific Ocean in the west. The climate is Mediterranean, which means there is no significant rainfall during the growing season, and the days are warm and long, and the nights are cool. So while some growing areas don't see much fog, many microclimates in the Napa Valley do. During the growing season, fog sneaks in from the Pacific Ocean through the gaps of the mountain and blankets the valley floor. By late morning, it will begin to burn off and the valley floor will heat up. This provides an ideal climate for grape growing. Alternatively, Napa's famous hillside vineyards, those above about 1,400 feet, aren't cooled by fog, but are instead moderated by their altitude, thus giving many hillside vineyards more hours of sun exposure at overall lower temperatures. Most fog influences occur in the southern 1/3 and the extreme northern parts of the valley due to the Chalk Hill Gap. Napa Valley is not only home to many microclimates, it's home to what I can only call an insane number of soil variations snuggled into such a small appellation. Diversity is demonstrated in the 16 different AVAs nested within the Napa Valley that all show distinct characteristics of terroir. Half of the world's soil orders are found within the Napa Valley. That's just incredible. These soils are both volcanic and marine in origin. Until 150 million years ago, Napa Valley was underwater. Through millions of years of plate tectonic activity and erosion, gravel, sand, clay, and alluvial soils were carried down to the valley floor, creating a rich, fertile, loamy soil. This erosion left hillside and mountain vineyards with less fertile soils, unknowingly, of course, creating the perfect terroir for the production of world-class wines. The various soil types and microclimates in Napa allow for the growth of many different types of grape varieties. And everything, of course, from what you immediately identify with the Napa Valley, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Sauvignon Blanc, to Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, Refosco, Barbera, Tempranillo. The list goes on, and it includes about 36 different grape varieties. In closing here, we are going to dig deeply into sustainability today, but I want to point out that Napa Valley is home to the first agricultural preserve in the United States, which was created in 1968 to protect agricultural land. When you stand in the Napa Valley, you may not know it, but you are standing in the preserve. The preserve prevents further commercial development and protects the agricultural land. Since 1968, four things: the Agriculture, Watershed, and Open Space Ordinance, the Land Trust of Napa Valley, the Slow Growth Initiative, and the Napa Green 2020 Initiative have continued to protect vineyards as well as bodies of water and other agricultural land in the Napa Valley. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Up first, Phil Katuri. Phil is the CEO of Enterprise Vineyard Management. He's the owner of Winery 16600, co-owner of Katuri Vineyards, and he is a pioneer in organic and biodynamic viticulture. He's been redeveloping Oakville Ranch for over the last 12 years and is passionate about the impacts of vineyard farming on the ecological systems surrounding it. Next, Alison Selini Wilson. Alison is the Director of Vineyard Operations at Cliff Lady. She went to school at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a focus on grape growing and integrated pest management. She oversees all farming and redevelopment of Cliff Lady's 3 estate vineyards and also acts as a liaison between grower partners and winemakers to ensure best vineyard practices. Gustavo Avina. Gustavo has been the Director of Viticulture at Pine Ridge Vineyards for over 15 years. He farms 5 different appellations: the Stag's Leap District, Howell Mountain, Oakville, Rutherford, and Carneros. Jason Moulton. Jason is the winemaker at Whitehall Lane. He has a degree in enology and viticulture from Lincoln University in New Zealand. He has 17 years experience making wine in the Napa Valley, Russian River, Canada, New Zealand, Bordeaux, and South Africa. Jason and his team at Whitehall Lane are committed to sustainability and recently completed the Napa Green certification program. So we are going to start with a discussion of the 2020 growing season. When we originally to have this seminar back in September, this would have been a much different discussion. But many of our attendees asked us to talk about the fires. So we're gonna start with a discussion on the fires. Alison, can you talk to us about the differences between the fires in 2017 versus 2020? I know there were differences not only in chemical pollutants, but in the incidence of smoke taint around the valley.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thanks everybody for being here with us to talk about this. You know, the difference between the 2017 and the 2020 fires, how I look at it was the timing, the phenological timing that it hit the grapes, and the length of time that we were kind of blanketed in smoke in Napa Valley. A lot of growers in 2017 had a lot of their fruit in and harvested. And in 2020, most of the fruit for a lot of growers, except for the few lucky ones, they still had it hanging out there. So we saw a lot bigger impacts of the volatile phenols on the fruit and then in the wine coming out of it. One thing that I'll always say is you can talk to 10 different vineyard managers, viticulturists, winemakers, and get 10 different opinions on it. So the thing to keep in mind about the smoke taint this year is that every grower had a different experience. I personally had smoke taint in every single one of the 10 AVAs where I get fruit from, but I know some people didn't. So going into it, I think we have a lot of data collecting to sift through before we actually get a real answer as to how we're going to move forward with this.
Great. Phil, do you want to talk about how your winery is acting, you know, how we're trying to be proactive in protecting the grapes and the structures and the employees from future fire damage?
You know, it's controlling fire is a long-term process. And it's been many years since we've had these grape fires. And this is the 3rd fire that I went through in my growing season. First one was in '96. And then we had the 2017, and the 2017 is the Tubbs Nuns Canyon fire happened in 64 also. So they're spaced out over 20 years. But what's really interesting about this is we've had them back to back, 17 and 20. And so really what we're doing is trying to create fire breaks in the vineyard. You know, traditionally, everybody say, well, a vineyard is a perfect fire break, but it's like everything else. We have continual canopies. When a fire crests into a forest, it runs through the top of the forest. When the fire hits the vineyard, it goes down the canopy. And we have drip hoses that are like a wick burning the trunks as they ignite. So the idea is to create fire breaks, you know, get rid of the underbrush in the forest, get rid of the laddering as we interface with the wilds, with the forest. Most of the vineyards that we develop and work at in Oakville Ranch in particular is a hillside vineyard. It's 60 acres of grapes planted over 110 acres. So you have forests growing inside of the vineyard, and we have to maintain those and reduce the fuel load for these fires to occur. And you know, we have irrigation, making sure that we have a generator set up so we can keep the irrigation going on irrigation valves and manifolds, setting up fire hydrants in areas so that firefighters do have access to the water, but making sure reducing the amount of fuel load that we have surrounding the vineyard. And you know, we discuss in the fire season our escape routes, how to get out. You know, when the 17 fires started in the middle of the night, there were a lot of people harvesting, and you know, there was a lot of communication as the fires were moving at a real rapid rate. The 17 fire compared to the 20, the first 2 nights of the 17 fire it was a blazing inferno, and there was a lot of communication amongst growers about where the fire was moving and how it was moving, so that the workers could get out of the way during this inferno.
Terrific.
But we have to
Thank
be
you so much.
responsible.
Oh, great. Gustavo, can you talk to us about how vineyards are being regenerated after burning?
Yeah, it's a very good question, but a difficult answer for our growers in Napa. After the 2017 fires, we kind of started a learning curve of how to deal with those vines after the fires. And it all depends how the fire really impacted the vineyards. Most of the people, when they saw that the vineyard burned, they decided to start removing vines. And some people decided to give a chance to the vines for one more season to see how the vines responds. So many of them found like the vines started to respond very well, but just before harvest, the vines collapsed because the injuries that suffered from the fires, and it didn't ripe the fruit. So as I say, it's like a learning curve. Now people are using like, I don't know if mentioned like a tool or no, but one point that they are using is like if the irrigation lines melted during the fires, the vines needs to go. That's kind of the point of the determination. If that melted, they need to replace the vines and start the replanting process again. So as I say, it's very difficult. We still are on the learning process how to deal with those situations.
It sounds like it's sort of from vineyard to vineyard. So some people may be able to save their vines, others not. But I mean, I love that if this is like the point, if the irrigation lines melted, you have to start over. Interesting. Jason, we are going to go ahead and move on. We're actually doing a wine tasting today, in case everyone didn't know. Whitehall Lane, Leonardi Estate, Cabernet Sauvignon. And we chose this wine because one of the questions that we were asked is, can anything be done to reduce the incidence of smoke taint? And Jason, can you talk about that in context with this wine?
The good thing about this wine, Amy, I will say we got all this fruit in before the 2017 fire hit, and we're able to make a successful wine. I want to say if you encounter it before you harvest, the number one thing that I kind of hold by is never try and machine harvest any fruit that you may think has smoke taint. The leaf material, the ash that could be on the grapes or on the leaves, you're just going to basically go in there and shake all that off. It's going to drop into the juice. It's going to absorb pretty much immediately into your juice, which is then going to be your wine. And so I say never machine harvest if that's your plan in the field, and making deliberate picking decisions based on proximity to smoke, directional smoke drift. Is there smoke settling? How long has the smoke been there? Settling and the intensity of it. When you get into wine, there are use of enzymes, carbon fining, reverse osmosis. It can be helpful depending on how bad your sensory experience is with the wine. It's different for everybody. As Alison mentioned, different level of volatile phenols. It is just, I want to say it's very complex and mysterious how it will get into the grapes and then work with your wine, and then how that translates into your palate. Is it ashy? Is it, a touch of smoke? Is it fruit subdued? So there are many complexities with that. Getting into the wine though, the 2017 Leonardini Estate, it is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. So like I said, it's from our estate vineyards, but 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, ages for about 26 months in barrel, unfined, unfiltered, and yeah, it's quite nice. Everybody.
Yeah, I think it's super lovely. Thank you so much for sharing this. I want to know, we were talking the other day about how you use technology in the winery in 2020 to mitigate some smoke ash taint. Can you talk about that a little?
So I've been through about 3 wildfires in winemaking in the past 17, 18 years. So learn more and more as we go. This particular fire in 2020 was interesting, quite different than the others. We had multiple heat spells that kind of were shutting down vines, but also at the same time, we were getting black ash, white ash, gray ash. The white ash is kind of this spent ash, kind of inactivated carbon. The gray and black ash are more activated carbon, which I would be really worried about getting into fruit. And so the moment that I saw that happening in the 2020 harvest, I called one of our vendors, Bucher Vaseline, who had this piece of equipment called the Densilus. And the Densilus is essentially this water bath system. You run it through in it. It basically submerges the grapes into a water bath, washes off everything. So we got that shipped in from France kind of at a moment's notice, which is really nice relationship to have. We were only one of 2 wineries in Napa Valley that had access to this technology, the other being Inglenook, just down the road from us. But prior to using the Densilus, which was, what was really important to me in talking about these gray ashes and black ashes, I wanted to inactivate that carbon the best way I could and clean it up. And so just taking kind of basic intuition, we have ozone. We use ozone in the winery here to clean tanks, lines, etc. And so I actually submerged all of our grapes in ozonated water for about 10 minutes, totally submerged them, and then tipped them into the Densilus and ran them through a water bath. This took off all of our ash. I don't have a single lot that is compromised after doing this. No ash, nothing. And so we're going to, proceed ahead with the 2020 harvest and making a lot of wines. I tell people we roughly brought in about 84% of our overall fruit. We did leave about 16% out there that was compromised in the field.
Thank you for that. I know that a lot of MW students and even WSET students now have a lot of examples for their exams. I just want to say that this wine is super lovely. It's I know it's Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's light and elegant and has all that like classic cedar, blackberry character, and the tannins are super approachable, especially for 10 o'clock in the morning, right?
Right.
So thanks everybody. We're going to move on to our discussion on sustainability. I'm just going to give everybody just a quick and dirty definition of sustainability. So in my opinion, sustainable farming maintains the integrity of the land as well as the balance between economy and ecology. It limits the use of agrochemicals to ensure that the land is sustainable for future generations. So Phil, I want to start with you. How do you manage soil nutrition in your vineyards? Because I know you're such a big proponent of organic and biodynamic farming.
What I do is the growing season is from April 1st to November 1st. I grow grapes. From November 1st to April 1st, I grow cover crops. You know, the worst type of agriculture is a monoculture. And at the same time, we're not going to pull up the vineyard and replant. You know, we want the older the vines, the better the wines and so forth. But you have to make the soils new constantly. You have to give back to the soils more than you take out during that growing season. And the use of plant material to increase the carbon in the vineyard, because carbon is the essence of life. And you know, but the growing of the cover crops, I have various different blends that we use depending on the soil types and how we incorporate the cover crops. I have various different ideas, again, depending on the soil types. But I want the plant not to be force-fed nutrients. I want the plant to mine the nutrients themselves from keeping the soils alive. The main tenet of organic biodynamic farming is that you have live soils. You walk through a vineyard, and I want the soils to be soft. I don't want to have compaction. I want to have a lot of plant material. And to me, I feel 80% of the nutrients that for my vines comes from the cover crops that I grow out there. You know, then you have a year like 2021 where we're not experiencing a lot of rain. But I look at my cover crops with a 25% of average rainfall, and they're already at 6 to 10 inches tall. You know, because if you build your soils up, you increase the ability to the soil to maintain water. So you're able to reduce the amount of water you have to do during a normal growing season. And when you're exposed to a year like we're having this, that little bit of rain goes a long way when you have live soils. You want to feed the flora and fauna, the biological and fungal activity in the soils. To me, it's flowering cover crops.
During years like this, are you using sprinklers or using overhead sprinklers to help with, because we're not having a lot of rainfall? Well,
we do a lot of overhead sprinkling to get cover crops established in the fall, especially on a new planting. We don't have a lot of permanent set cover sprinklers, but I'll tell you this right now, I've already started doing some irrigations out on rockier soils just to try to fill up the moisture bank in our soils, because it's been dry. And then when you have this wind that we've been having for the last 2 days, you go out there and you could just see the plants drying out, because the wind's a real desiccant. And I came in from pruning this morning, and you cut a cane this morning and it's not green, it's white, because of the total lack of moisture that we have. But we have to, by increasing the carbon capacity in our soils, we can increase the moisture holding capacity. And that's important.
And Gustavo, if I can just sort of move that into a discussion with you about at Pine Ridge, how cover crop and soil management contributes to sustainability for you?
Yeah, first, cover crop is a good way to prevent soil erosion. That's very important thing there, especially that we have hills. And also, cover crops helps with fertility a lot. So the first thing when you are going to put a cover crop, you need to set up your goals. What's the goal for this type of cover crop? Is my vineyard too vigorous, or is my vineyard weak? So does the vineyard need some competition if it's too vigorous? If it is too vigorous, we plant grasses that competes for water with the vine, so that holds the growth of the vine a little bit. And if the vineyard is kind of weak, we use cover crops to induce more nitrogen into the ground, so that helps to avoid some of the conventional fertilizers that we could use. Mowing the cover crops, incorporating into the soil helps for the discomposition of that, and it also creates more organic matter. Also, legumes, for example, are very good at nitrogen fixation to the soil. some growers, like we do in areas where we have more pests or more insect disease, we grow a certain mix of flowers in there that creates like insectary areas for insects that by living in there acts as predators for other insects. So that's a really good way of biological control too.
Yeah, great. Alison, can you talk to us about your controlled, your preferred, weed control measures in the vineyard sustainably?
Yeah, so you know, at Cliff Lady, we're Napa Green, fish friendly farming certified. We're not organic, but we try to implement as many organic practices as we can without just throwing out our entire toolkit. So we like to do the undervine implements. We use the Germania, we use the Clemens, but in sustainable farming, we still have the economic restrictions, the labor issues, and you like to have different options in our toolbox. So we've eliminated the use of Roundup or glyphosate, and we've moved towards using chemicals like Rely, like a glufosinate, more of a contact herbicide if needed. Luckily, it's been, luckily for weed control, we've had a few really dry vintages. So weeds haven't been as big of an issue in the vineyard, and we've been able to use that mechanic control.
Can you speak a little bit more to what you were just talking about on economic restrictions and labor issues relative to sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that every single season is different, right? We all go into the season knowing what we want to do, what we need to do. We have our farm plan, and then our job is to pivot when something happens. And a lot of times what happens is we have a shortage of labor. We don't have enough people to go through the vineyard and shovel all the weeds, and we have to turn towards a chemical control. It's not optimal. It's not what is on my plan written at the beginning of the year, but we have to be flexible, especially with some of the labor shortages right now.
Yeah, and thanks a lot, Jason. I want to talk to you because one of the the hottest maybe topics in viticulture right now is the no-till frenzy. And one of the things that we've all been talking about sort of here is that how we like the soils to be lighter, how we want them to be aerated and not compact. Can you just talk about your thoughts on this current no-till carbon sequestering discussion in viticulture, and to speak whether you till or don't till?
Yeah. So currently, it's a really good question. Currently, we do till, we do cover crops, we do grasses, mustards, etc. We don't actually do legumes anymore because the legumes, this will be good for any students on board. The legumes recently in the last year or two were kind of deemed to have been a host environs for the alfalfa leafhopper, which is the predominant vector for spreading red blotch. And so we've absolutely eliminated legumes from our mix for cover cropping, and just moved away from it completely. And so in regards to the no-till carbon sequestering, so my consultant viticulturist, his name's Dr. Paul Skinner. He's actually experimenting on this stuff right now. And Paul is, he's currently using a product, I can't name it for confidentiality reasons, but he's using a product that essentially, you plant it down the row and it acts as a cover crop, and it won't compete with the vines for water or weed. It actually helps stave off weeds, and so you have less weed control. So you are essentially putting in a different cover crop that's able to fix nitrogen like your other cover crops, not take as much water. It goes dormant in May or June, which is really important because that's when your vines need a lot of water to move on in that cycle. So they go dormant, and then you basically avoid all these tractor runs. So, you know, all the carbon that you're putting into the air from carbon, from diesel engines, or running down the row and running an herbicide through. It's all about preventing that sort of thing. So the idea is you want to take in more CO2 into the environment, or take in more CO2 and put out more O2 with the process. And so we're going to be doing large scale trials on a lot of our blocks in the fall. It's too late this year, but that's online for us.
I'm sorry, Jason, what is the plant called that you're putting in the ground? What is the cover crop called?
It is, I can't name it currently.
Okay,
like I said, it's an experiment, and there's a confidentiality agreement between my viticulturist and this company. And so I'd love to tell you more, but I can't.
At first, I thought I missed it, and I was thinking, I don't think I missed it. I think we can get it. So we're going to all keep an eye on that as students. I want to maybe, Gustavo, can you talk about one of the things that we struggle with, well, as grape growers everywhere, is powdery mildew. It is really prevalent in all vineyards. And I think many of us are looking for ways to reduce sulfur sprays and dealing with powdery mildew. Can you discuss any alternative methods that you're using in the vineyard to sulfur?
Yeah, there is a lot of products that you can use, copper, oils, but all those products work differently. Some of those gives you a longer protection. Some of those are contact action, and it depends on the coverage that you do when you apply your fungicides. But I have to say, in my own experience from those years, cultural practices and preventative application are always the best. Cultural practice like removing leaves around the fruit zone early in the season, expose the fruit to more sun, more air ventilation. That's always the best way to prevent powdery mildew. Eventually, as you say, depends the years. Every year is different. You get the powdery mildew there, so you have more alternatives. And there is a lot of organic material that you can use. One thing that we like to use is kind of expensive, but it calls Cali Green, but it's based in potassium. So that's a really good to eradicate.
Gustavo? It's called
Cali Green.
Okay.
Cali Green. It's really good, but when you go into Cali Green, it's because you already have a big problem in the vineyard. And it really helps to eradicate that. But as I say, preventative actions like cultural practice are always the best.
Yeah, is this Cali Green product, how is it applied? Is it applied differently than sulfur? Is it just sprayed? Is it like a foliar spray?
You apply like a foliar spray as well. And you want to use lots of water per acre when you spray Cali Green. So you make sure that you give a good coverage into the fruit or the canopy of the vine.
Okay, and does that product need to be applied more frequently than sulfur, or any products other than sulfur? My understanding is, and what I've found in our vineyard, is that they need to be applied more frequently, and then you worry about more tractor passes in the vineyard. Do you guys have any issues with that?
Well, you know, with our weather stations that we have out there, which are really important. Am I on mute? Yeah.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. That we could monitor the mildew pressure. So if the mildew pressures are low, you could lengthen the intervals. Mildew pressures are high, you'll shorten the intervals. And the best thing is the shorter the intervals, especially in the springtime, to establish as the vines are growing, and making sure that if it's a high mildew pressure, you go 7-10 days if you're doing it organically, but be cognizant of the growth level of the plant, the time of the year, and the reduction of the use of a lot of nitrogen in the growing season. When you have a highly nitrified plant, you have soft tissues. Soft tissues are more susceptible to disease, mildew, and to insects. And so you want to, and anything that you're doing, especially as in expanding organics, you want to maintain a sense of balance, and that balance is in nutrition and the balance in the soils.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that, Phil. Gustavo, will you talk to us about the Pine Ridge wine? From Stack Leaf District 2015, Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, we had a 2015 Stars Leaf District wine. We at Pine Ridge, we farm 47 acres on the Stars Leaf area, 4 different vineyards, and each vineyard is slightly different. Microclimates that you mentioned earlier, microclimates are different from vineyard to vineyard. We had a vineyard that is probably a mile north from the steakhouse, from the winery, and I can find the temperature is maybe 5 degrees warmer over there. And also soil characteristics are well different. Some of the vineyards have a little bit more rocky, sandy soils, while other ones have a little bit more clay, loam. But they all in the Stars Leaf area, to me, is one of the best regions to grow wines in Napa. It produces a very high quality fruit from there. So yeah, the 2015, I think it's doing great. It was a good vintage for us, and we are proud of this wine here.
It's super youthful. I mean, I feel like just, tasting it next to the Whitehall Lane, whereas the Whitehall Lane had a little bit of this of more black fruits. I feel like the Pine Ridge has more, it's like loaded with blueberries. It has lots of acidity. It's super fresh, even though it's 5 years old or 5.5 years old now, that, it's still so incredibly youthful. I think it's super wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great wine. As I say, we have a 47 acres, and this wine came from one of the best blocks of the winery side.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that. I think we're going to move on to talk about climate change. Climate change, when we asked our attendees what they wanted us to talk about, that was probably, I mean, Connor, you can confirm, is probably half of the questions were about climate change. So Alison, I want to start with you by asking, are you making different farming choices at Cliff Lady and the vineyard for what farming decisions are you making for the short versus the long term as our climate is warming?
Yeah, I mean, short-term changes that we're making that are going to end up benefiting us long-term. We recently acquired we've been farming in Stags Leap and in Calistoga for years, but we acquired 87 acres in Carneros that we set out to replant. And it was originally planted to, the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. We planted some of that back into the vineyard, but we're also exploring Bordeaux varietals. We planted a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. We planted some Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and then we have a whole experimental block. So we have 20 varietals down there. It's been a really fun experience. We're trying to bring in stuff like Roussanne, Marsanne, more Rhone varietals, just to see how they do. So we have an area to really study and look at it. No wines are necessarily planned at this point, but we want to know what we can grow down there. And what we can do with those programs. Also in replanting, we're thinking about climate change. We're also thinking about, again, I'm going to go back to the labor thing. We're not going to plant a vineyard anymore that can't be mechanized one day. I think that, the mechanization, having row spacings that are wide enough for mechanical harvest, if it comes to that, having the turnaround space, having vines at an ergonomic height, all these variables, I think a lot of growers are considering as they move forward, and we see the climate change and we see labor issues come to the valley.
Yeah. Gustavo, do you want to share some information on the new planting areas that you're doing at Pine Ridge due to climate change?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, we farm on 5 different AVAs from Carneros to Howell Mountain, and all areas are different. And Carneros area is well known for more cooler climates over there, but I think we all agree that global warming is happening. And we started to monitor the weather in the Carneros area for a few years. And we found every year we have more degree days, more warmer days in the area. So we decided to do a trial. And we grafted over 500 vines from Merlot to Cabernet Sauvignon to see how the Cabernet responded over there. And we were surprised that it responded very well. We were afraid about ripening times, and it really ripes early in the season. I think it's we bring those grapes in the middle of the harvest. There's no doubt that the Cabernet can do well over there. So we were very satisfied with the results from our Cabernet and Carneros, so that we decided to pull first 3.5 acres of Chardonnay and replanted to Cabernet Sauvignon. And now we are in the process to do another 8 acres in the same area. So we are very happy. We like the wines, the structure of the wines, and we want to continue with more Cabernets and the Carneros area.
Great. Phil, can you talk about how at Oakville Ranch you're using rootstocks, trellising systems, clonal selection to adjust to the changing climate and or just to improve your sustainable farming practices?
The rootstock choices and clonal choices are really important, especially as we're warming up. And something that Alison mentioned, raising the fruiting zone. There was a big fad through Napa. Let's have all these small, short vines. Number one, they're really hard on your back, and number two, heat reflection. If you raise that fruiting zone up to from 28 inches to 36 inches, your fruit is cooling. And there was another big fad of getting these vertical system, where traditionally, when I started working with vines over 40 years ago, there was a California sprawl. So the trellises I'm doing now is a combination of a hybrid vertical system, still growing it straight up, so we have a little tighter spacing and you get tractors through, but creating shade. Not having everything perfectly rigid, but letting the fruit have filtered sunlight instead of direct sunlight. In using rootstocks that might take a longer time to ripen in the warmer areas. So the idea is to have, as winemakers, they want to have a certain sense of hang time. You want to get the fruit through the equinox. You want to harvest in the fall. You don't want to harvest in the beginning of September Cabernet. I think when the lights change in after the equinox, the plant physiologically is setting the cup flavor as fruit. So you have a rootstock that can withstand the heat in the warmer climates. Something like 428 that has a long growing season. And these are all the decisions that you have to make on the individual piece of property that you're doing. But I really believe trellising, not having direct exposure of the fruit to the sunlight, raising the canopy up, getting 2 to 3 degrees less heat reflection in that canopy makes a real big difference. And row direction, lots of times in a hillside, you're restricted by the shape of the hill, but not running east-west, not having direct sunlight onto the canopy, using all that technology that you can to mitigate the heat storms that we seem to normally get right around the 1st of September.
Can you just dive a little deeper into the clonal selection? What clones would you, let's say, use for Cabernet now or whatever you want to plant? I guess we're tasting Cabernet Franc today, opposed to what you would have done in the past.
If I was growing Cabernet in a cool section, I would use something like 3309 or 1114 and an on-top clone, a French clone like 337, 3169 that has a shorter ripening curve. If I'm growing Cabernet in a warmer area, say in the northern or even in the Oakville area, going with 420A, 1103, depending on how rocky it is. And I like the heritage clones tend to ripen slower. And so you want to be able to get the fruit ripe, but you want it to ripen slower. You want it not to accumulate a lot of sugar before that has flavor. And a lot of the older heritage clones really manifest that, especially in the Napa Valley, like the C's and Cab Franc, which we'll taste later on, the old Saunders clone of Cab Franc, that can withstand the heat a little bit more and ripen a little bit slower. And so 420A and the C's clone in the middle of Oakville will ripen slower than it would if it was 3309 and 337.
That's wonderful geeky information. Thank you, Phil.
I could throw out a lot of different numbers, but
Those are some really good, solid examples. I appreciate that. And I think this leads really well into Jason. I want to talk about what you're doing at Whitehall Lane with focusing on less well-known varieties or new varieties that are being developed at UC Davis.
Got it. So clearly Pierce's disease has been making an impact on people's vineyards along river riparian areas for a number of years. And we have a property that was seeing a fast decline on vine health due to the proximity to the river. So our viticulturist, Paul Skinner, reached out to UC Davis and Dr. Andy Walker about planting these new varietals that have basically been slowly developing for over 20 years. So it's been this very long process that UC Davis has been doing to try and create a Pierce's disease resistant varietal. So they had a series of varietals that were made into wine and did a bunch of trial tasting panels with other winemakers, other viticulturists, and vineyard managers to see what was most desirable. And so we fine-tuned our selection on two varietals. One was Caminiere Noir. It's a red grape that has characteristics of both Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Syrah. And the other was Paysan Noir, which has characteristics of Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, and Cabernet Sauvignon. And these grapes have been fascinating to work with here. This past year was our second vintage. So 2020 was our second vintage with them. They don't have serious pyrazines. They can continue to ripen on the vine well above 30 bricks. It's fascinating without a breakdown in the physical structure of the berry. The flavors on the grapes as well as the wine's really stunning. I actually have the two bottles here. They're pretty rare. We only did about 15 cases of the Paysan Noir. That's how it's spelled, if anybody's wondering. And then this is the Caminiere Noir. And we made about 25 cases of the Caminiere Noir. And the phenolics on these wines were far more superior than Cabernet as well. So I was measuring phenolics against Cabernet and Merlot and these two varietals, and the spikes on these were impressive. So one day I'm just tasting through these and I just saw the phenolic profile and it was just massive compared to Cab and Merlot. And I had to immediately drain and press them and then nurture them along the way and then made them into wines. So they're the first commercially available wines of these two varietals that UC Davis has been working over 20 years on. So it was really exciting to be a part of that.
That's fantastic. And it leads us to Alison. I want you, can you talk about the wine that we have today, the Cliff Lady 2017 Cabernet Sauvignon from Stag's Leap District, but also, so if you can talk about, using shade cloth and other vineyard practices that aid in managing alcohol levels and ripeness as the climate changes. But also at Cliff Lady, you guys are doing some trials on planting Gamay and Marsanne and Roussanne and Carneros. Can you talk to us about those two things and discuss this wine? I know that's a lot.
I'll start with the wines. This is our 2017 Stag's Leap District Cab. It's our flagship wine. The fruit comes from our estate, our Poetry Vineyard estate, which is hillside up to about 400 feet elevation. At the northern end of Stag's Leap, our Twin Peaks Vineyard estate surrounding the winery, so kind of valley floor leading toward the river, and a few of our neighboring vineyards and vineyard partners in Stag's Leap. We buy some fruit from the Stelzner family, and there's some fruit from Clodoval in it this year. 2017, it started out as a fun harvest. We had a heat spell Labor Day weekend, and I had to race home from a wedding because it was time to start harvesting a little bit early. We made the decision as a winemaking and vineyard team to just go ahead and start bringing that fruit in. You'll kind of notice a little bit in this wine, since it's that hillside versus mountain fruit, it's a little bit brighter. We kind of dialed back the extraction in the winery because we just got fried by that early sun before the fires. So none of this fruit has any smoke taint, none of it has fires, but what we were dealing with in 2017 was a little bit of dehydration and shrivel from the heat wave that we didn't expect. So we utilized optical sorter this year a little bit more than normal. So we probably, we'll spit out anywhere between 5 and 15% of berries with that Plunk optical sorter. And for 2017, about 15% were probably caked out this year. Going into shade cloth, Phil actually kind of laid the groundwork for me on this. When you're dealing with a hillside, you can't really play around with row orientation as much as you'd like. This vineyard was planted prior to the 30% ordinance on an erosion control plan. When it was replanted, the terraces had to stay as is. So I would have loved to go up and down on this western facing hillside with my vine rows, but I had to kind of follow the contour of the land. When it was planted, most of it was planted to about a 3-foot vine spacing and a 5-foot row spacing at about a 16-foot head height. So I've been working over my last 6 seasons there to gradually get through the blocks and raise the head height up and install tiny little cross arms. So about what I can get in is about 6 to 8. So I can still get my equipment in. But as Phil was saying, bringing the head height up on that western facing hillside kind of volcanic soils gets that fruit off the ground, maybe gets you a little bit more airflow underneath, doesn't get it right. But at this vineyard, we're fighting ripeness every single year. So until I get all those head heights up and until I get all the cross arms in to kind of open up the canopies, we've utilized shade cloth. And if you've ever been in the valley, we're usually the first people to get that shade cloth up right after veraison on our poetry hillside. And it gives us an extra few weeks of blocking that harsh sunlight so that we can get, that ever seeking hang time that we're all always looking for in the vineyard. And hopefully we can pick that poetry vineyard end of September, early October.
Great. And the trials on planting Gamay, Marsanne, and Roussanne and Carneros?
We've got some Semillon down there also. I've thrown I think of a new varietal every day and then I literally have 1 row of Malbec just because our winemaker's like, I'm never going to use that Malbec. I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's just do a row and see what happens. So I'll have to get back to everybody on where these, these experiments go, but vines have been in the ground for a year and we're looking forward to doing similar to what Gustavo's doing at Pine Ridge, just seeing what the fruit looks like, making a few barrels of every varietal, and if something really clicks, then we'll top graft and we'll put more of it in.
Can I ask you about, raising this as head height, because this isn't something that I'm super familiar with. Can you just discuss how you actually, the physical means of doing that and what the cost is behind doing something like that?
Yeah, so it's labor intensive. So our poetry vineyard is all cane pruned anyways, instead of spur pruned. So every year we're taking 2 second-year canes and we're training them to the wire, and then we'll get the shoots and all the fruit from there. So starting out with already a cane pruned vineyard makes it a little bit easier. We'll usually, we got the cane wire, and then we've got the next wire. So we've been adding wires. We have like 20 wires on those vines now, and just gradually training those canes up to the next wire just to lift it. And it started out as, we want to keep the grapes cool, but also our vineyard team is like sitting on the ground while they're farming and like finding ever creative ways to get vine to vine without having to stand up and bend over and kneel down. So it's labor intensive, and we have one in-house crew of 8 people. So that's why we kind of get about 2 acres done every season. But it's worth it for the health, sustainability of your workers, and for maybe getting that fruit lifted off the ground and staying cool a little bit longer.
Thanks for the explanation on that. So in tasting the wine, this wine is so wonderfully savory and very, it's very earthy. And I was like taking notes. It's like rosemary and licorice and tobacco and like super balanced tannins with the fruit profile. I know that you've been struggling with ripeness, but this wine is really balanced. So congratulations on that. We've got about 20 minutes left. And for the last 20 minutes, I want to talk about technology and innovation in the vineyard. Gustavo, can you start us off by talking about your use of weather stations to monitor soil moisture? We talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but can you talk to us about Thule assistance? And I'm going to write that in the comment section.
Yeah, the Thule sensor is it's a device that we have in the vineyard, and it's using it wider in Napa Valley. As more years come, and I see people using more and more. And it basically reads evapotranspiration of the vine. To me, it's very simple to say, like, it tells you how much water the vine uses, and it tells you how much water to apply back to the vine. Also, Thule sensor helps you to determine future vine stress. So you can go on your phone, you can go on your computer and see what the readings are, and you can determine if really your vine is going to have a stress in the next few days. So you can predict that and start applying water earlier. Like if also monitoring the weather, if you see like there is a heat wave coming, so you can start irrigating earlier. So the vine is ready when you have the heat wave here. So, I mean, I found like a Thule is a really great tool, but I always say that we need to combine our technology in the vineyard and our own vision to the vines. I was in a seminar a few years ago at UC Davis, and somebody asked, what's the best tool you can use for irrigation? And I say, a parking sign for your vineyard manager. So how means with that? Yeah, tell your vineyard manager to park his truck and walk to the vineyard and see if what the technology is telling you is what you can see in the vineyard too. So that way you can determine that irrigation is more accurate in the vineyard. But a Thule is a great tool.
You're working with nighttime irrigation sets too?
Excuse me, what was that?
You're working with irrigation sets in the evening and not just irrigating during the day?
Yes, we have automation of the irrigation with combined with weather stations that you can irrigate from home, from wherever you are. When your phone, you have the app, you can set up irrigations there automatic. So of that vineyard where we had that systems, we try to irrigate at night where less evaporation happens. So you utilize the water more, and also you wanted to save water too. Yeah, we after we started using that, it's one of the vineyards that we harvest last always, and before we put the automatic systems, we kind of skip some irrigations because we were involved in harvest. But now that we have the automatic system, we irrigate on time, and we found like that's the most prestigious fruit that we can bring to the winery.
Great. Phil, you use the Thule system too. Can you talk to us about your use of it?
Yeah, I've been using the Thule system since it came out. It was part of the beta project of managing it. And I approached it with an old time farmer's attitude. I don't need a machine to tell me when I want to irrigate, but it really, like Gustavo said, you combine that with your knowledge of your block, and it gives me some great information. I got a report one day and it said, you put 46 hours of water on this vineyard, and I flipped out. So this is not true. And sure enough, a valve stuck, and it ran for 46 hours. And I think I'm exaggerating, but it was over 20 hours of water went out there. And so it does monitor the water going through a drip line. And I combine that with I'm automating all of our irrigation systems. When I develop a vineyard, and I'm doing this in retrofitting on vineyards too. We started out with drip irrigation, 30 years ago. We used to have overhead irrigation, then went to drip. We had a single line. Now I'll design a vineyard and we'll have 3 drip lines out there. One for primary irrigation, one for secondary irrigation, and one for a cooling system. And and I have 3 valves for every block, one for primary, so you could water the whole block. Secondary, so for replants, for in hillside vineyards, you have you talked about the difference of soils in the Napa Valley. I think I have every one of them on one vineyard, You go through, you have a rocky section, a clay section, a well-drained section. And in the old days, you'd water just to that to the one that needed the most water. This way, with the secondary, you could pinpoint your problem areas. And the third one, cooling. You know, as I'm not a big fan of shade cloth, just because I don't like what it does to how it breaks down, what it does to the plant. But I do like running a cooling system. And if you think about it, when you go into a produce store and they have the little misters going on, doing that same thing in the vineyard. And in a hillside situation, on a given block, you look at the contours of that block, and you might only use 50% of the block will have a mister on it. But when the temperature hits 92, 93, 94, you turn on a cooling system. And again, this cooling system is tied into our drop, what's called a drop system, is our automation that we're using in the vineyard, where we design a program on a computer. I don't do it because somebody has a little more technology than myself. But when it hits 93, that it goes on, and we start cycling 10 minutes per block of running the cooling system, and you start creating convection currents. You create air movement, and cold air runs down a hill, so that you water the top part, you cool the top part of the hill, and it cools off the whole block down below it. And I've noticed, especially in 2020, it seems like every year is the hottest the year we've ever had. 2020 was intense. We had smoke, we had heat, and we didn't have our normal fog coming in to cooling this off. And I found that there was less shrivel, which is a Cabernet's grower's nightmare. That's why I like those large varied varieties like a Grenache or a Zin that don't shrivel up, but Cabernet does. And I found when using the cooling system, I was able to eliminate that, not 100%, but not 90 to 80 to 90% of it. And like I said, it's a little expensive to install, but you're dealing with Napa Valley Cabernet. And you're selling fruit at $17,000, $18,000 a ton. If you save a half a ton of fruit per season per block, you're more than paying for the installation of these cooling systems, and it creates a healthier plant. If we can't get the fog to come in, we try to make it ourselves, and at the same time, by having pinpoint irrigation through secondary, and then with many flyovers and drones looking at and NDVIs looking at our blocks, we can figure out where we need water. Ideally, every winemaker here, every grower here, we'd love to be dry farming. I grew up dry farming. I still have blocks that we do dry farm, but there were 400 vines, 500 vines of the acre. We have 2,000 vines of the acre. They're going to take a little more intense inputs, but if I can reduce my water input 15%, 20%, it's huge over a growing season. If I could reduce a half a ton of shrivel, it's huge. And that's Buckminster Fuller's talked about applied technology. As a farmer, we're traditionalists, but if we could apply technology to give us what we want in the long run, we're ahead of the game, and we conserve our resources.
Great. Phil, can you talk to us about the Oakville Ranch Roberts Cabernet Franc?
Yeah. The Oakville Ranch is there's the label. It was planted last century, originally in the 1980s. It's the highest elevation in the Oakville AVA. It's up to 1,100 feet on the Baca Range. And this Cab Franc block is the old Saunders clone on 1103 Paulson. And I have my philosophies where I want to grow Cabernet Franc, but this is the first block I installed cooling on. It's a Western exposure, and it has direct exposure. When I grow Cab Franc, I want to have the same heat as Cabernet, but I want to keep it a little bit more coddled, because to me, Cabernet Franc has just these feminine qualities and how it grows and in the flavor profile. And so, but this was the hottest spot on the property, and I I put cross arms on it, and I put cooling on it. And 2016 was was another warm year, but you get the blueberries, and you get this is the volcanic soils, the deep red soil with a lot of core stones, and this is a good example of the fruit that we grew up there.
It's really textured Cabernet Franc, and not green, not that green pepper driven Cabernet Franc at all. It's violety. It's really fresh. It's such a beautiful example of Napa Valley Cabernet Franc.
Yeah, Cab Franc is one of those varieties that you want to limit that's bigger, and you want to have it. That's why I love growing in the hillsides. Controlled growth comes naturally up there just by the limited soils. And,
that's great. We have some questions from our attendees, which I want to get to. So I'm gonna challenge my panelists. I'm gonna throw out a question to you, and we're gonna have a speed round. So Gustavo, I'm gonna start with you. What cover crops are you using to introduce nitrogen into the soil?
We use mixed legumes. That's pretty much what we use. And then we use some oats and wheat also. Yeah.
Great. And Gustavo, this question is also for you. Which soil type do you prefer to irrigate at night, and which in the day? Or no, maybe, yes, Gustavo, that's you. And if anybody else wants to answer that, please step in. So soils to irrigate at night and soils to irrigate in the day.
I don't think it's a huge difference in what type of soils you decide. It's more like if you can irrigate at night, do it in any vineyard that you have. Doesn't matter the type of soil. It's always evapotranspiration of the water. That's what you are more concerned about. If you are irrigating during the heat, you're losing part of the water that you apply into the vineyard.
Great. And for Jason and Alison, I've got a question for you that I think it would be good for you both to answer. It's from Francisco. It seems to me that sustainability must include a social side, either in fair working conditions or in promoting responsible consumption. Do your wineries include such initiatives?
I defer to Alison, ladies first, and then I'll.
I think that Jason and I will probably agree on this question that the social side and fair working conditions is a huge part of the sustainability. Like I was saying, we're not just raising the head height on the vines primarily. It was a decision being made for our employees. The thing that I think a lot of people don't realize when you think of agriculture in California, you might have an image in your head of migrant workers, people that don't work here or don't live here year round, just coming in to do the farming during a certain time or harvesting and then leaving. And that's just not the reality in Napa. The people that work in our vineyards are skilled workers that know the vineyards they work in. They know they live here in the community. There are teachers, there are neighbors, there are friends. And so the working conditions, I think the Napa Valley is really passionate about making sure that it's sustainable for the workers who are here in our communities and working year after year in these vineyards. And we want the same people year after year. I have eight people on my vineyard team. I've been at Cliff Lady for 6 years, and the whole team is the same as they were the day I started. And I think that that's always what we want to achieve, and we can only achieve that by having good working conditions.
Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, so we have 3 different vineyard management companies, so I don't have any in-house oversight on their practices, but I'm really firm on protecting them, making sure they have tents out there, they do have their water, and that we've had 3 fires with lots of smoke in the last couple of years. And I want to say nobody's really brought up the 2015 fires, but in Lake County there was the 2015 fires. 17 there was a set of fires. Was it 18 or 19 just at the tail end? And then 2020. And so the idea of having our workers pick in smoky conditions, not interested in it at all. We're very protective of them in that. I remember back in 2017, I was asked if we wanted to proceed in picking, and I absolutely refused to do anything until people had masks. And watching AQIs was really, really important to me as well before we got anybody out there to pick any fruit.
And AQI is just for International Air Quality Index.
Air
For-
quality index.
Yeah. Phil, moving over to you, and I was going to actually, we talked about this a little in our pre-call, but would you mind telling us, this is probably our last question, how much the 3-tiered irrigation system costs per acre versus just a 1-tier irrigation?
It's about $3,000 more an acre. The trenching is the most important. To develop an acre of grapes in Napa Valley and the hillside, you could be spending up to $250,000, depending on the erosion controls and the automation, the amount of rocks you move. And so the investment of installing a three-pronged, a 3-hose irrigation system is not that much more, because again, what it does, it saves you some valuable fruit, conserves water. An average vineyard in Napa is $150,000 an acre, and of that 10 to 15% goes into the irrigation system. And conserving, like I said, if you conserve 20% of your water, that's a huge amount. And it's so you can't cut corners on any of these wines that we've tasted today. You can't cut any corners in growing them and having a great labor force. We pay livable wages that to live in Napa, it costs a little bit more than living in other parts of California. But you can't cut corners, because if you cut corners, you're cutting it in the flavors that you're getting out of your wine. And that's what we do, is to celebrate the soils that we grow on and the flavors that we grow. And if it's an extra $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000, it's worth it in the long run, because it's not what we're establishing is not for today, it's for the next 25 years. And I only want to plant a vineyard once. And there's vineyards I've had to plant twice because they've burned. And I got to figure out a way not to do that. But having, as Alison said, you want to have the same people coming up, taking care of it. You want to have the same people knowing that irrigation. You want to have the same people knowing every square inch of the property that you work. So you just don't cut corners. And that's what I tell my clients, and then they complain that I'm too expensive. But in the long run, I want a bottle of wine that celebrates where we live.
What a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody. Connor, do you have any words for us in closing?
Let me pop back on here. Well, thank you all so much for just this amazing discussion. We've had so many questions, more questions than we could possibly get to come in. So thank you all for joining us, sharing your knowledge. Thanks to our audience out there for joining us and learning about Napa Valley, and for drinking Napa Valley, for supporting Napa Valley, for selling Napa Valley, for however you're involved in the wine industry. Thank you for your time and learning about Napa. And thanks again to all the panel. We appreciate it. And everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, everybody.